Booyaka, booyaka. Rey Mysterio made an appearance on the Jaxxon Podcast this week. What's a Jaxxon Podcast? I don't fucking know. Apparently it's hosted by Rampage Jaxxon, the UFC guy from the mid-2000s that was a beast. He had a stint in TNA for a minute. Yeah, he's got a podcast now. Him and some other guy, I guess they started a fucking jewelry company. I don't know, some sort of men's jewelry, Jaxxon, and chains and that kind of shit, if that's your thing. And apparently they just decided, you know what would go great with a jewelry company ran by an MMA legend? A podcast. That's every good jewelry company needs a podcast. And of course, we would not hesitate to cover it here on this show, especially when they have legends like Rey Mysterio on. And man, this was a good conversation, actually. Is for never hearing of these guys. Well, I mean, I've heard of Rampage. I don't know the other guy. I've never heard of this podcast. But this was a fantastic little interview. Good conversation. I'm glad I stumbled across it. All kinds of fun stuff coming out of this. But it was when Rey was asked about working with his son, Dominik. And Rey's talked about this before. Talked about Dominik, working with Dominik, that sort of thing. But they kind of got into something that I never really heard Rey specifically address. And that's that when Dominik first started, they kind of tried to model him after Rey a little bit. And it didn't work. And he was kind of flopping. And that's when they made the decision to split Dominik off away from Rey is where Dominik really started to come into his own. Here's Rey Mysterio talking about his son Dominik's journey in the WWE.
My son was pretty much raised around the business, doing, he was already part of a story angle in WWE in 2003, 2004 with Eddie. And, he just grew up around the business. He just never showed any interest, not until about the age of 19. And wasn't good at school, played football, but he wasn't going anywhere. And one day he was like, Dad, I want to see if I can break in the business. So I never expected that from him. I said, sure enough. That was when he was 19 years old. He's 27 now. And in the past 3 years, he's had the success that I never had in 3 years breaking in the business. I mean, times are different, but as a father, you can only imagine how proud I am.
Yeah.
Incredible. Yeah. You don't have any kids, right?
Yeah. I got a bunch of kids.
Yeah, okay.
I had one that wanted to follow my footsteps, but, he felt like, I feel like he's like, I think he's living in my shadows.
Right.
So he didn't want to listen to any of my advice. So I was like, all right.
That always happens with parents, especially for the career that I've had, the longevity, started at the age of 14. I'm 49 now, so I've been grinding for the past 35 years in this business, this profession. For my son to come in out of nowhere and not have my style, have a different build. He's 6'1", he's about 190. So it was very hard for him at the beginning to try to adapt and find his role as a wrestler. The comparisons were made, and of course, he couldn't live up to them. Not until we separated, and he continued on his own path without having his dad by his side, and that was the best thing that could have ever happened to him.
I wholeheartedly agree, and that was one of the criticisms right off the bat. These second-generation people trying to live in the shadow off of the name of their famous daddy, it's never going to work like that. That's how you end up with, like, what was that? Bruno Sammartino's son tried to wrestle for a little bit. Forgot his name. A couple other people have Eric Watts, another one, right? So there's these guys that maybe have no business even being wrestlers that try to follow in their father's footsteps, and it just doesn't work. Dominik kind of looked like maybe he would be that guy at first. Dominik came out. He was trying to, be sort of like his father. They were tag team champions together. The whole babyface run for Dominik was a complete bust. He just wasn't getting over. He was learning, though, and that was the good thing. But, man, when they split him up from Rey and he was able to go out on his own and find himself, so to speak, because Dominik is a completely different character from Rey Mysterio. He's much more Eddie Guerrero. He is the second coming of Eddie Guerrero. He really is. Now, work-wise, he's got a long ways to go. Personality-wise, he's got a long ways to go, but he's got that look, right? He's got that, it's not just the greasy long mullet, but it's in the dirty mustache and shit like that. But it's also just kind of the way he walks, the way he carries himself. He's kind of got that sleazy vato-ness to him that Eddie had. And I just think he's found his stride away from Rey Mysterio, being with the Judgment Day, being amongst his peers, like Rey said, being able to learn from them and evolve away from Rey without Rey pulling him aside and saying, hey, you fucked this up, you fucked that up, you did this wrong, you did that wrong. Dominik has completely come into his own. He is one of my favorite people to watch on WWE television. He's great. The heat that he gets from the crowd, it's good heat. Even, it's part of the show. It's not go away heat, we hate you. It's fun to boo Dominik. His stuff with Rhea and even his in-ring work. Like, he's not great, but you can see he'll get there. He's already got a lot of the little things down. And it's really like that character presentation and finding, especially as a second generation wrestler, finding your stride, finding your footing, finding what works for you and different than what your father brought to the table. Dominik would never make it as a luchador, as a masked wrestler, as a high flyer, probably not even as a baby face. But God, as a sleazeball, grubby heel. Just no redeeming qualities. Just a sleazeball human being. Great. Dominik's easily one of my favorites. He's come so far since he came. And this is fun, too. I love this kind of shit because I was watching wrestling back when they had Dominik on a pole, right? When they did the ladder match for the custody of Dominik Mysterio, and he was involved in that angle, and Eddie was claiming to be his real father and all that shit. I'm your poppy now. My God. That little chubby baby face Dominik with his cute little eyes, his rosy cheeks, and his dyed blonde hair with the gel in it. Remember the early 90s or early 2000s where they had the gel, the frosted hair with the gel? Anyway, Dominik's doing great, man. I love to see him finally hitting his stride. I love that he was able to find his way in the wrestling business separate from his father. And I think he's going to be a huge success. I think he has already stepped out of his father's shadow. And I don't mean that in the sense that he's obviously not more successful than his father, but I think he has found his groove where he can exist in the wrestling business and not need to be compared to his father. He's a completely different thing. He's a different entity. It's like nobody's going to compare Bray Wyatt to fucking IRS, right? They're completely different characters. It would be funny to see Bray come out with suspenders and a tie and shit when he was around, right? That would have been fun. But no, it's good to see Dom found his way. But let me know your thoughts. I've rambled on this enough, but I just thought this was a fascinating conversation, and not so much like I said that we've heard Rey talk about Dominik before and talk about how proud he is and shit, but to really kind of get into the struggles Dominik had and really acknowledge that Dominik wasn't there as a wrestler at that time, and it wasn't until he broke off that he found his stride. And just the whole dynamic of second generation and third generation wrestlers anyway, just how they find their paths, how they make their way in the wrestling business. And I think this is the way to do it. You have to go a completely separate route. You have to reinvent yourself. Or just, him, he's got a lot of Eddie in him, man. A whole lot of Eddie. I see it before Eddie really, it was like when he came over, like the Radicals, Eddie Guerrero. That's what I'm thinking. Because when he was in WCW, he was a fantastic wrestler. And he had some personality. He started the LWO. You could start to see that coming out of him. But it really wasn't until, he had basically his main event run in WWE where you could see that he was really coming out of his shell and just a super charismatic, lighten up the room personality. But he wasn't necessarily that. He learned that through his first couple years of being in WWE and doing the character work, like stuff with China and that sort of thing. That's where Dom is now. That's what I see. You see him as a younger Eddie Guerrero, and I see nothing but good in Dominik's future.
Thank you for checking out the video. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to rest in peace.